Welcome to the Tim Booker channel, where wisdom is worth spreading. Wishing you an enjoyable listening experience. Today, we're going to discuss a book titled Die Kunst, klaren Denkens. Even from the title, you can tell it's a book about how to think clearly. So, how can one achieve clear thinking? It starts with dispelling some common thinking errors we often fall into unintentionally. For instance, why do you find yourself doing something you don't want to do just because others are doing it? Why is it said that free things are actually the most expensive? Why do we tend to hoard useless things at home, refusing to sell them for money? Why is zero risk often a scam? Why is it that the more precise the description, the easier it is to mislead and make mistakes? Why, despite following self-help advice rigorously, do you still struggle to achieve success? And why do you swim every day but can't attain a physique like Sun Yan or Ning Zitao? These questions all stem from thinking biases, common psychological phenomena that are not strongly correlated with intelligence or education. Sometimes, even experts and scholars make these mistakes. These errors, whether in investing, work, shopping, or socializing, are closely related to our daily lives. Therefore, recognizing these thinking errors and learning to guard against them are crucial. The author of this book, Rolf Dobelli, is a German economist with a Ph.D. He is also one of the founders of the Swiss Idee bookshop. An economist delving into psychology, nowadays, we call that interdisciplinary. But precisely because of this interdisciplinary approach, he can explain things clearly and understandably, making it accessible even to readers with no background in psychology. Furthermore, he combines his expertise with eloquence, making the principles vivid and persuasive, benefiting readers from various fields. As a result, since its publication in 2011, this book propelled Dobelli to fame, ranking as the best-selling non-fiction book in Germany for the year. It received high praise from discerning readers, such as Roland Berger, the founder of the renowned Roland Berger consultancy firm, who strongly recommended everyone to read this book. Even the author of The Black Swan, Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who was inspired by Dobelli, said that his blend of expertise and creative talent is rarely seen since the Renaissance. With such high praise, let's dive into the book and see what it has to offer. In this book, Dobelli presents 52 thinking errors, categorized into 5 major groups: errors stemming from a lack of independent thinking, emotional biases, errors related to statistics and especially probability, outcome biases, and self-awareness biases. For each category of error, the book provides typical examples, psychological explanations, and solutions, allowing you to confront and overcome these errors, ultimately teaching you how to think clearly. Let's now discuss these errors one by one. First, let's talk about the errors caused by a lack of independent thinking. When making judgments, we often don't rely solely on our own inner thoughts but are influenced by other factors, such as the crowd. We've all likely encountered situations where we didn't want to act a certain way, but when everyone else was doing it, we followed suit. For instance, when walking down the street and seeing others looking up at the sky, you find yourself doing the same. Or when attending a performance, if others applaud, you join in. This phenomenon is what we commonly call conformity. How serious is this psychological phenomenon? Scientists conducted an experiment where they gave test subjects a baseline line, say 10 centimeters, and then presented them with lines measuring 9 and 11 centimeters, asking them to compare and indicate which line was longer or shorter. When tested individually, everyone got it right. However, in the second phase, when 8 people took the test together, with the first 7 being actors deliberately giving incorrect answers, 30% of the genuine test subjects followed the incorrect responses of the actors. This illustrates the pressure of the group on individuals, causing people to abandon their rational judgment and conform to the majority. This is known as the herd mentality, or simply going with the crowd. How did this psychology develop? The author explains that it's an instinct passed down from our ancestors. Imagine a few primitive humans walking on the African savanna thousands of years ago. Suddenly, they see some movement in the grass up ahead, and the others start running. In such a situation, if you were there, would you stay put to observe what's happening or would you immediately run with the group? It would undoubtedly be the latter, as your brain would send a warning signal that there might be danger ahead. You wouldn't have time to assess the situation, you'd instinctively take the action most likely to avoid risk, doing what everyone else is doing. Over time, this behavior has been passed down through generations, making conformity an instinct. So, when you find yourself in a group where everyone is saying and doing the same thing, it can create a pressure called groupthink. This pressure makes you unconsciously follow along, inhibiting your ability to think independently. Of course, this doesn't mean that our survival instinct, developed over thousands of years, is wrong. Following instinct can be reasonable in situations of natural disasters, emergencies, or when there's no time for deliberation. However, in many situations, you have the capacity for independent thinking. When making a judgment, it's essential to distinguish whether you're making it based on clear, rational thought or simply because you see others doing the same. Another form of conformity is blindly following authority figures. For example, when we hear someone with an expert title, we tend to trust them. When we see people in uniforms, we often obey their commands. This is known as authority bias. There's also a related concept called the halo effect. Have you noticed that many advertisements feature celebrities as spokespeople? This exploits the halo effect of celebrities. If you think about it, the star endorsing a product may not necessarily be knowledgeable in that product's field. For example, a sports star endorsing sneakers makes sense, but why would the same athlete endorse a coffee machine? To address authority bias and the halo effect, the author suggests having a consciousness of challenging authority. This means discerning whether you're following an authority due to their expertise or merely their status. There's one more error that can be seen as an upgraded mix of the previous two, known as groupthink. Even elite teams of highly intelligent individuals can sometimes make low-level mistakes. The book provides examples, such as the 1961 U.S. invasion of Cuba and the 2001 collapse of Swissair. In both cases, decisions made by elite teams led to failures. Psychologically, this is referred to as groupthink. When you're part of an elite team discussing an issue, if everyone agrees, you might be reluctant to voice a dissenting opinion because, after all, everyone in the group is elite. How could they all be wrong? Yet, others may be thinking the same. This is why a group of intelligent people sometimes makes foolish decisions when subjected to the dual pressures of group and authority, falling into the trap of groupthink. How can you break free from groupthink? If you're a team member, don't be afraid to present a different opinion, even if it seems foolish. If you're a team leader, encourage the inclusion of diverse viewpoints. The author even suggests taking it a step further by appointing a designated devil's advocate. When everyone else agrees, this person must voice a dissenting opinion, no matter how reluctantly or absurdly. In summary, the errors stemming from conformity, authority bias, the halo effect, and groupthink all occur due to a lack of independent thinking. The solution to overcoming these errors lies in those 4 words, independent thinking. It involves breaking free from the influence of the group and authority figures on your own judgment. Now, let's move on to the second major category, emotional biases. People are susceptible to the influence of emotions and feelings, including desires for kindness, the hope of being liked, narcissism, nostalgia, or appearance-oriented attitudes. Some thinking errors arise from these emotions, and we collectively refer to these errors as emotional biases. Reciprocity bias, often called reciprocity, is perhaps the most typical and widely applicable emotional bias. What does it mean? It means that most people have a natural aversion to being indebted to others. Once you owe someone a favor, there's a sense of obligation that makes it challenging to refuse when that person asks for something in return. Moreover, what you end up giving in return may be far more costly than the initial favor you received. Some individuals exploit this psychological tendency to lead you into making mistakes. An example is provided where several decades ago, there was a sect in the United States whose members all wore pink robes, making them easily recognizable. They would strike up friendly conversations with people at train stations or airports, sincerely offer flowers or various small crafts, all free of charge and without expecting anything in return. However, when you disembarked at another station, other sect members would approach you for donations. Many people fell for this scheme. This phenomenon is known in psychology as the reciprocity bias. When you accept a favor from someone, you tend to feel an implicit obligation to reciprocate when that person asks for something later on. It's what we commonly refer to as being easily persuaded or feeling obligated. While the sect mentioned earlier has been disbanded, similar behaviors still exist today. For instance, you might encounter someone in a supermarket offering you a free taste of food. In such situations, it's best to be cautious because once you've sampled the food, you might feel obliged to make a purchase, even if you didn't find it particularly tasty. This psychological tendency often leads us to invest more time, energy, and money into things we didn't originally intend to, resulting in a loss. This also explains the saying that free things are the most expensive. Another common emotional bias in this category is called the endowment effect. What does it mean? In essence, when you possess something, you often overvalue it emotionally compared to its actual worth. There's an idiom that goes, cherishing a worn-out broom. Essentially, it means that even if an object is old or worn, you still find it valuable simply because it belongs to you. This leads to a misjudgment of an item's value beyond its objective worth due to the attachment of emotions. This is a common psychological phenomenon. On a smaller scale, the endowment effect might lead to hoarding unnecessary objects at home that take up space. On a larger scale, it might cause you to miss significant opportunities. Let's illustrate this with an example. There was an investor named Munger, a close associate of Warren Buffett. He recalled a lucrative opportunity early in his career but didn't have enough cash at the time as he had invested heavily in stocks. If he had sold his stocks to invest in this opportunity, he could have earned much more money. However, he insisted on holding on to his stocks, believing they would fetch a higher price in the future. As a result, he missed the opportunity and lost out on $5 million. This is the endowment effect, overestimating the value of what you already have, leading to missed opportunities. Another more severe manifestation of the endowment effect is assigning emotional value to something you don't yet possess but desire to acquire, often causing you to be willing to pay more than its actual worth. The classic example is auctions. Why do people participating in auctions often engage in irrational bidding, driving prices higher and higher? It's a consequence of the endowment effect. That's why Warren Buffett has famously stated that he never participates in auctions. We humans are often called emotional creatures. Our behavior is indeed frequently influenced by emotions and feelings. However, we also possess rationality. When making decisions, we must use reason to examine our emotions critically. Now, let's delve into the third major category, errors related to statistics, especially those linked to probability. Most errors associated with statistics result from disregarding probability. For example, consider buying a lottery ticket. If one offers a prize of 10 million with a 1 in a billion chance of winning, and the other offers a prize of 10,000 with a 1 in 10,000 chance of winning, which one would you choose? Most people would opt for the first one, but from a probability perspective, the second option clearly has a higher likelihood of winning you money. When you see reports of airplane accidents and immediately cancel your flight to take a train, you forget that, statistically, traffic accidents on the road are more than 100 times more common than airplane accidents. This is an error born from neglecting probability. There's also a concept called base rate, which essentially refers to the most likely scenario. Here's another example. If you encounter a German who wears glasses and loves Mozart, from a statistical standpoint, what is he more likely to be? 1. A truck driver, or 2. A literature professor in Frankfurt. Many might choose option 2, but that's incorrect. The right answer should be 1 because there are far more truck drivers in Germany than literature professors in Frankfurt. Looking at it from a statistical perspective, factors like wearing glasses and loving Mozart can be misleading information. What you should really consider is, what's the most likely scenario? This is the base rate, and understanding it can help you see problems more accurately. Another common error is the zero-risk bias. Zero risk is something many people desire, but it's actually a matter of cost management. Suppose you can spend the same amount of money to reduce a risk from 5% to 2% or from 1% to 0%. Which one is more cost-effective? Many people would choose the second option, reducing the risk to 0%, and this is the zero-risk bias. The first option reduces the risk by 3 percentage points, while the second option only reduces it by 1 percentage point, but the cost is the same. We often pursue zero risk, ignoring the cost, which means the cost you pay to achieve zero risk can be much higher than the cost of taking on some level of risk. If you were the President of the United States, how would you reduce the risk of terrorist attacks to zero? The only truly effective way to ensure zero risk is to have everyone under FBI surveillance. This would mean that half of the United States population would have to be FBI agents. But what if some of those FBI agents turned rogue? Then you'd need another group to monitor them. Continuing this way, the end result would be a nation entirely populated by police and agents, and the risk of terrorist attacks would be reduced to zero. However, would such a society be livable? This book tells us that the pursuit of absolute zero risk is foolish and often impractical in most situations. Furthermore, zero risk is frequently used as a deceptive slogan by politicians or businesses, leading us to pay a high price or make erroneous decisions for it. Now, let's explore the fourth major category, outcome-based errors. This category of errors is more challenging to understand than the previous ones and isn't easily summarized. It involves us thinking there's a cause and effect relationship between two events, where A leads to B, so we conclude that whenever A occurs, B is bound to follow. However, in reality, that's often not the case. Let's take an example. If someone has a headache, tries a folk remedy, and their headache is gone the next day, people who hear about this might assume that the folk remedy cured the headache. Subsequently, when they have a headache, they use the same folk remedy, only to find it not only ineffective but also delaying proper treatment. This is getting the cause and effect relationship wrong. We often focus solely on the outcomes and fail to carefully consider whether the reasons we believe cause those outcomes are indeed the true causes. We tend to emphasize results. When something has a negative outcome, we question whether our initial decision was correct. When the results are good, we believe our past decisions were exceptionally wise. However, outcomes alone should not be the basis for judgment because there are too many factors that can influence results, and sometimes good outcomes are purely due to luck. Retrospective reasoning, as it's known in English, is a common psychological phenomenon. In this book, it's aptly translated as the hindsight bias. This bias can mislead us into thinking we have strong foresight. In reality, hindsight is not foresight. Assuming that we've grasped causal relationships and using this approach for all future decisions can lead to significant errors. Another similar error is the swimmer's body illusion. It's when we look at professional swimmers and think their bodies are so fit because of daily swimming exercises. However, it's very likely that this is reversing the criteria and the results. These individuals became professional swimmers because they already had a naturally athletic physique that's suitable for swimming. Swimming exercises only help them maintain and enhance their bodies. One more outcome-based error to be aware of is the survivorship bias, which is crucial for decision-making and life planning. According to the book's author, success is like a form of survivorship, with very low odds, but it gets an extraordinarily high amount of exposure, potentially leading people astray. The book explains survivorship bias like this: in everyday life, we are more likely to notice other people's successes than their failures because the media tends to highlight stories of successful individuals. This thinking tendency can systematically overestimate the chances of success and create a fantasy about success, obscuring the reality of how low the probability of success actually is. So, how can you counteract the survivorship bias? The author suggests an unusual approach. Instead of only reading about successful people's biographies, take some time to visit the graves of those who failed. These are the outcome-based cognitive errors discussed in the book. If we were to pinpoint the main reason behind this category of errors, it would be the inability to accurately perceive the external environment. Now, let's delve into the fifth and final major category of errors, which is the self-awareness bias. Accurately understanding oneself is easier said than done, and there's an ancient Greek saying, "Man, know thyself." If you fail to understand yourself correctly, it can lead to two primary harms: overconfidence bias and self-attribution bias. Both of these biases are quite straightforward. People often tend to overestimate themselves. In one experiment, researchers randomly surveyed a group of French men and asked if they considered themselves above average as lovers. Perhaps because the French are known for their romance, 84% of them answered yes, even though, by definition, only 50% of people can be above average. So, at least 34% of them were overconfident and overestimated themselves. The greater consequence of this thinking bias is that when we make plans, we tend to be overly optimistic and don't consider risks and difficulties adequately. There's an example to illustrate this. The Sydney Opera House took significantly longer to complete than initially planned. This is a result of the error of overconfidence in planning. Interestingly, studies have shown that men are more prone to overconfidence bias than women. Self-attribution bias is also quite common. It refers to our tendency to provide explanations for events that favor us. For instance, when a company performs well, its leaders often attribute it to their excellent leadership. On the other hand, if the company does poorly, they may attribute it to their subordinates or various external factors, without seriously considering their own responsibility. This thinking bias undoubtedly affects your judgment and interpersonal relationships. So, what's the solution? The best approach is to have candid friends around you who can point out your flaws and shortcomings. If you lack such friends, then you might need to set aside your pride and have a drink with your archenemy to hear their perspective. After all, an individual's enemies often see their weaknesses more clearly than their friends. Self-awareness bias also includes an interesting derivative bias called the fundamental attribution error. This means that when analyzing a situation, we tend to systematically overestimate the influence of people and underestimate situational factors. For example, when discussing World War II, we may think it was all because of Hitler, or when discussing World War I, we may focus on the Sarajevo assassination. But the reality is far more complex. In complex situations, the influence of a single person is minimal. The performance of a multinational corporation isn't significantly affected by the CEO's abilities. The economic functioning of a major nation and the decisions of its finance minister and central bank governor often aren't the most critical factors. However, people tend to exaggerate the role of individuals when analyzing events because we love drama and enjoy imagining specific individuals as the most critical players. This is another area where vigilance is needed when thinking critically. Alright, that concludes the content of the book, The Art of Clear Thinking. Let's summarize it one last time. Sometimes, we fail to think critically because we fall into common thinking errors. These errors are often cognitive biases. In this book, 52 of them are listed and categorized into 5 major groups. 1. Errors caused by a lack of independent thinking, such as herd mentality, authority bias, halo effect, and groupthink. To overcome these errors, it's essential to cultivate independent thinking and challenge authority when necessary. 2. Emotional biases, stemming from irrational thinking influenced by emotions and feelings, including reciprocity bias, endowment effect, and more. When you need to think rationally, be mindful of minimizing the impact of emotional factors. 3. Errors related to statistics, especially probability, like ignoring probability, neglecting base rates, and zero-risk bias. Since probability is not something we can intuitively grasp, it's crucial to consciously consider problems from a mathematical perspective. 4. Result-oriented biases, which involve confusing cause and effect, or incorrectly assuming causation between two unrelated events, leading to erroneous judgments. Examples include the hindsight bias, swimmer's body illusion, and survivorship bias. 5. Self-awareness biases, where people tend to habitually overestimate themselves or make excuses when things go wrong. To correct these errors in self-awareness, you need a friend who can be brutally honest with you or even an adversary. And that wraps up The Art of Clear Thinking. Congratulations on completing another book. Thank you for your support and attention. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker channel. Give it a thumbs up and share it with your family and friends. Wisdom is worth spreading, and it opens the door to a brighter future. Thank you, and goodbye.